Hello, and welcome to the new season of David's Divergent Discussions. I'm your host, David Gray Hammond, and today was meant to be a roundtable episode, as you may have seen from the graphic that introduced us. But unfortunately, due to personal stuff in people's lives, it's just me and Charlie, but we can make it work. Charlie's a
That's
very good
okay.
podcast guest.
Yeah, we both
So
have a lot to say, I think.
we both have a lot to say. So yeah, we'll get right into it in a minute. Obviously, we're going to be talking about CAMHS, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, which both of us have had our dealings with in the past as both clients of theirs and as uh, parents and professionals. So we can cover this from a lot of angles. Remember, you can join us in the chat, and if you have questions or anything you'd like us to talk about, drop it in the chat, and we will do our best to get to it. To start off with, we're going to do brief audio descriptions for people who might not have visual here. So I'm David Gray Hammond. I'm a mid-30s white Mediterranean male with a beard that desperately needs a trim and a head that needs shaving, although it is fairly shaven. I'm wearing thick rimmed purpley grey glasses. I have an ear tunnel and a lip piercing, and I'm sat in a very blue room. Charlie, could you give a brief audio description, please?
I'm Charlie Hart. My profile's a she, they. I am a 40-something woman with long blonde hair, and I'm wearing a pink satin blouse. And behind me is a mural, which is a countryside scene with a rainbow and some pine trees and a couple of eagles and a couple of deer. So every time I come on one of these live streams, there's a few more details added.
Okay, so as I've said several times now, we're here to talk about CAMHS. Now, if you're watching this, there's a chance you might be aware that there is an ongoing campaign at the moment to do something about the fact that CAMHS refuse to see autistic children and young people. Um, it goes deeper than that, though, because it's not just that they refuse to see children and young people who are autistic. CAMHS are completely ill-equipped to support autistic children and young people. I hear stories all the time, and in fact, I just wrote today an article involving quotes from a person who was talking about their daughter's experience of being under CAMHS, and they professionals, like in a lot of situations, don't have the knowledge that's required to support autistic young people, and it can have life-threatening consequences. It's a really serious thing. I think a good starting place really could be, Charlie. I know you've had some dealings with CAMHS. Do you want to talk a bit about your experiences there?
Sure. So just for background, and I will give you a trigger warning here that I am going to talk about child death and bullying and suicide. My eldest child wasn't actually seen by CAMHS. He was referred for anxiety, but at that time I had private medical insurance. So he was seen by the Priory Wellbeing Centre, who correctly identified that it's not just anxiety, it's autism as well. And they put him through a course of therapy with an adolescent psychiatrist who was trained in dealing with kids with autism. But unfortunately, he ran out of words, never got to see anyone that could actually prescribe medication. And we did end up losing him. Now, his younger sister, Z, she started exhibiting high levels of anxiety during the first lockdown, and particularly when the schools went back following the school closures. And at that time, she was referred to CAMHS. Now, we live on the border of Birmingham and Worcestershire, and our doctor's practice can send referrals in either direction. So the first referral went to to Hereford and Worcestershire CAMHS, who got Z in a WebEx appointment where she was absolutely inconsolable, with tears streaming down her face, barely able to breathe, saying that she couldn't cope, that she's absolutely drained. She couldn't say whether it was the social aspects of school or sensory or what, but she wasn't coping at all and described herself as crippled with anxiety. She was really in a bad place. And at the end of that appointment, because Izzy was autistic, we then got a letter saying that they'd reviewed her case and that they believe all her issues are due to autism, and that she was not exhibiting anxiety over and above what you would expect in an autistic child. So they declined her referral. Forward wind then to the following year of the pandemic. She'd been in and out of school a few times and her attendance was down to about 50%. She was self-harming and developing an eating disorder and in a really bad place mentally. And the school was so concerned that they referred her again. And this time they marked it urgent. Hereford and Worcestershire CAMHS then phoned me. They phoned me and said, "You've referred Izzy before, and we still think her issues are to do with autism, and you need to phone the helplines on the letter that we sent you previously last year. And I'll tell you now, we are rejecting this referral." And then they entered into a conversation with me where they asked a few questions about if you took away all the problems with school and took her away from big family meal settings and anything else that was stressful for her, and let her do what she wants all the time and indulge her special interests and things, would she be okay? And honestly, yeah, because autism in itself is not something that makes you inherently mentally unwell. It's a neurological difference. But they took my words and twisted them and wrote another fobbing off letter, this time saying that they talked to me and that based on that conversation, that they decided that she would be better off getting occupational therapy for her autism and to help her thrive at school, and that she was fine at home and there was nothing significantly wrong with her mental health. So another referral, but this time twisting my words. So I complained to PALS, and they did not uphold my complaint. They agreed with what Hereford and Worcestershire CAMHS had said. This time now I'm really worried about her because she's dangerously underweight, self-medicating with Monster Energy, and her blood test results from the GP were extremely alarming with signs of liver damage and kidney damage. So I spoke to her GP, who said, let's try Birmingham CAMHS. They accepted the referral, but insisted that she had to have talking therapies. She's not a talker. I really think she should have been seen by a psychiatrist and prescribed antidepressants or something to help with the anxiety, and that doesn't involve sitting in a room across the table from an adult she doesn't know and doing a lot of talking, which doesn't suit her at all and is frankly not inclusive and very distressing to her. So she ended up going to one such session and then refused to attend any more, and that's the last we've heard from them. All the while I'm trying to get her assessed for ADHD as well, because I fully believe that most of the reason that she's struggling as she is because she beats herself up about her executive functioning struggles. And she's in the process for that as well, but not so much as an acknowledgement, no idea about how long the wait is, years at least, if at all. So she's been absolutely let down, and I've already lost one child who is a neurodivergent kid who was full of life and had a lot to live for. And I don't want my next kid going the same way. So this is extremely personal to me.
Yeah. And I think there's a few things to unpick there. I mean, obviously, it's a terrifying experience. I think when you've already lost one child to see another child going through similar.
Yeah.
But then you are right. autism is not a mental health problem, and whilst anxiety is common for autistic people, it is not a part of being autistic.
Yeah.
It's not in the diagnostic criteria. And the way I look at it is Luke Bearden's golden equation: autism plus environment equals outcome. So if the outcome is anxiety and the autism can't be changed, something in the environment is
Yeah.
going wrong. So I see this a lot with kids, who have been through school trauma. People going, well, why can't they attend school? Why are they too anxious for school? Why are they school refusers? I hate the word school
Yeah.
refusers, by the way. Um, well, it's because something in the school environment is inherently traumatic to them. You know, why are we putting our kids through that? They are not anxious because they're autistic. They are anxious because something is going wrong in the wider world. And I think, you then get into the institutionalized parent carer blame, because CAMHS and social care, they love to blame parents. And so they go, well, the environment that's going wrong must be the home environment. It's the parenting. We're going to send you on a parenting course.
Oh,
No.
yeah.
Like,
They did that. Early intervention did that with my eldest, Iggy, when he
yeah.
was young. They sent my husband, who's his stepdad, and my first husband, who's his dad, to a parenting course. And it wasn't anything to do with their parenting.
And so often those parenting courses, they're not helpful at all. And I think so many of us wonder why that is given. And I think really it's because there are no resources. Okay. CAMs, don't get me wrong, CAMs are very responsible for a lot of harm. But we do have to say, I think, being realistic, perhaps there would be more help from them if they weren't criminally underfunded, under resourced, understaffed,
Yeah.
and if there was proper funding and access to good quality training around autism.
I feel like they're given quotas to fob off as many people as possible.
Yeah, I feel like that as well. And what this is one of the things that really needs to be looked at, is that blaming parents for their children's struggle is not a valid replacement for having the correct resources. And I think we have to consider the fact that autistic parents are more likely to have autistic children. So the people who are often falling victim of this parent carer blame are autistic parents, disabled parents. And this fits in with the research of Clements and Aiello, which I think was done in 2021, which found that disabled parents are much more likely to report falling victim to institutionalized parent carer blame.
Yeah.
But there's this broader issue of CAMS, they are just rejecting autistic young people from the get go, or accepting them and giving them inappropriate treatment. For example, you mentioned your daughter being offered talking therapies. A lot of talking therapies don't fit well for autistic people because the therapist does not come from a neurodiversity affirming position. They do not come from a position of having good knowledge, good competence in neurodivergent experience. And so, what I always say is therapy is as good as the person delivering it. So
Yeah.
if the person delivering that therapy doesn't know enough about being neurodivergent, that therapy is going to be fundamentally flawed. And, in some cases, don't get me wrong, medication can be used wrongly by psychiatrists. But in some cases, medication can be life saving. And yet, so many stories I hear are autistic young people not being given access to psychiatrists because they don't meet threshold, in inverted commas.
Yeah. I've got some more anecdotal evidence on that without mentioning any names. But
Yeah.
I'm a member of a outstandingly good autism parents support group. It's led by self-identified autistic OTs, and they really know their stuff. But the number of parents there with particularly teenage girls who have got eating disorders and are self-harming and in severe mental distress, who can't get seen by CAMHS, and the first advice is write to your MP or write to PALS, and if that fails, the only course of action left for the parent is to illegally give to their child sertraline that's been prescribed to themselves. that's the situation that some parents I know have been forced into.
Yeah, and this is what we get to, is the desperation that parents are pushed to. And I just want to highlight this comment here. Trudy Valentine says, "Wouldn't it be nice if services had more neurodivergent people working in them?" And I absolutely agree with that. And one of the things that I think CAMHS needs to look at is, because I've spoken to professionals who used to work for CAMHS who are neurodivergent, and a lot of them have said the reason they stopped working for CAMHS is because the workplace was hostile to them. You
Yeah.
know, we
If
need to
it's
look
not
at,
inclusive for staff, then how is
yeah,
it going to be inclusive for service users?
precisely. And sort of moving on, one thing I wanted to highlight, because I think a lot of us know that there are a lot of autistic people in inpatient units at the moment. A lot of autistic people in inpatient units, and this affects adults and young people. Even though in terms of CAMS, we're looking at young people, but you know when we're thinking about autistic young people being sent to inpatient units, would that be necessary if CAMS were actually providing good quality care in the community? Wasn't the whole point of care in the community, when it came out in, what was it, the late 90s, early 2000s, they really started pushing it? The whole
Yeah,
point was to try and reduce the number of people, needing inpatient treatment. And yet there are, I think the last figure I looked at, there's literally over 1,000 autistic people in assessment and treatment units. And that's not okay, because they are not, I've been an inpatient in an assessment and treatment unit. They are not pleasant places to be when you're autistic. It's not a nice experience.
yeah,
And that kind of leads me on to my own experience of CAMS, because if CAMS had done their job when I was a child, I wouldn't have ended up in inpatient.
yeah.
I I had well, at the time they called it a nervous breakdown. I realise now it was total autistic shutdown. I
Yeah,
don't really remember it. My mum says she found me sat in the middle of the living room, rocking backwards and forwards, unable to speak. I was out of school for 3 months. I was referred to CAMS. They gave me 5 minutes with a psychiatrist who said that I was ADHD, and because I didn't want to take ADHD medication, they discharged me and never saw me again. My mom was threatened with court and all sorts because I couldn't attend school. The school were the least supportive people they could have been, because I was supposed to have like a gradual return to school. But as soon as they got me through the door, they got their claws into me and forced me back into full time immediately. And as by the age of 18, I was hearing voices. I wasn't diagnosed with schizophrenia until last year at the age of 32. But at the age of 18 was when it started. And because I had learned that services weren't going to help me, and I was terrified if I told them I was experiencing psychosis, I would end up on an assessment treatment unit. I turned to drugs and alcohol, and I went through years of addiction that could have been avoided if CAMS had given me the correct support at the time when I most needed it. And this is the very real fallout of autistic people not getting support from services like CAMS, is that things get worse. Children with mental health issues who are not helped become adults with even worse mental health issues.
yeah,
And I just want to, on the note of school trauma, Marsha Ashman just says school-based trauma is horrific, and it is. And it is something that affects so many autistic young people. And yet CAMS really have no knowledge in this area whatsoever.
yeah, definitely. I'm so sorry they let you down like that. Uh, I've been talking to a lady that I used to work with who said that her teenage son had some serious issues. He was autistic as well, and he was taken into a CAMHS inpatient unit. This is in Warwickshire, quite recently, I think, as well. And they didn't do anything to help him recover from his mental health challenges. They kept him in there, and he made friends who could possibly have been autistic themselves. He connected with people, and then watched as one and then another and then another ended their lives. So that isn't going to help this kid.
And this is one of the things that really concerns me, because I'm not saying this is the case for every inpatient unit, but I've heard so many stories, including in the blog post where I was quoting, with permission, quoting a parent who was telling their story to me. You know, young people in CAMHS units, they're not necessarily safe. There's no guarantee there. Suicides happen in these CAMHS units. Self-harm happens in these CAMHS units. And whilst I can only talk as someone who was in an adult inpatient unit, contraband makes its way onto those units. I remember the second time I was on a psych ward, I was 30 days sober and there were drugs and alcohol flowing freely throughout that unit. It was not. And, it got to the point where I came out of that unit worse than I went in. And I think if that's what it was like for me as an adult, what on earth is it like for young people on a CAMHS inpatient unit? And, when we think about that, um, Kate Groombridge is very helpful. He just said there are just under 400 young people on our waiting list for an ND diagnosis transferred from CAMHS waitlist as they don't go near ND in my city.
Yeah.
When you think that's how many people are awaiting diagnosis, that's potentially 400 kids who have been struggling so much because being undiagnosed is really difficult. If you don't know for sure that you are neurodivergent, if no one is taking account of your needs, life is hard. And that is 400 more kids
I think
who,
they need to be able to screen for neurodivergent conditions.
yeah,
And,
absolutely.
when I took Iggy he was 14 and the school were concerned about his anxiety attacks, and I took him to the Priory Wellbeing Centre, and the psychiatrist there, she spent a good hour and a half with me and Iggy talking to us both. But she asked him, when you say anxiety attack, what exactly do you mean? What are you experiencing? What's triggering it? How are you responding to it? And when he described feeling like he wants to disappear and cowering in a corner and not being able to breathe and not being able to speak, and she said to me at the end of the appointment that her impression was that the underlying cause is autism. Well, the underlying cause is not autism, but this is why he has struggled going through life in a neurotypical way with neuronormative standards. But if she could pick that up and suggest that he should be assessed for autism, why are people in CAMHS units not doing the same thing?
Yeah. And I think that, it highlights that issue with, there is a difference between, for example, a meltdown and a panic attack. And this is the sort of thing you would expect a CAMS professional to know is
Yeah,
the difference between an autistic meltdown and an anxiety attack. But
yeah,
what they see is an
yeah,
autistic person and go, it's all autism. And this costs lives. Your family is evidence that, these things cost lives. And, you know, it it deeply concerns me. I actually want to highlight this comment from Bobby Ellman, who says, nothing has changed in 2 decades. CAMS removed my youngest son as soon after official diagnosis after refusing an assessment for over 2 years. Now, when I talk about the times I went through CAMS, around about 15 years old, that's almost 2 decades ago as well, and why has nothing changed in 2 decades? Because I am certain that autistic people have not been being quiet for 2 decades. The
no,
neurodiversity movement has been out there, maybe not as well known, but it's been out there for, well, since the 90s, the early 90s at the earliest, the later, well,
yeah,
but so
98 or
there have
so,
been
yeah,
people talking about autistic rights for a long time, and yet people still aren't listening. And
no,
this is a real thing. CAMs need to do their job because it is costing us our autistic young people. It's costing us the next generation of autistic voices, and they deserve better than that.
yeah. My daughter's resorted to self-help in the end, so she gets more useful tips about emotional regulation and looking after her own mental health from TikTok than she ever did from a mental health professional.
Yeah, and it makes me. It really it does. It makes me angry that we have to turn to these things. And I think at the core of the problem is, as NT in an ND world says, lack of competence from not learning from listening to those with lived experience. You know, I'd leave it up there for a second, but really, I think sometimes there is too much emphasis on the research that is sort of in the mainstream, which is all done by neurotypical researchers. And then there is this, because of that research, there is this constant invalidation of autistic people's lived experience. So it doesn't matter how many ways we tell them that what they think about what being autistic is wrong, they don't advance their knowledge because they listen to those neurotypical researchers. And, you know, we all know there's a core group of researchers who get cited a lot. And instead of listening to them, they should be listening to us, the people who have been there, the people who are out here trying to tell our stories, and yet they don't.
Yeah. They didn't listen to Izzy either when she was saying that she's crippled by anxiety and can't cope. That quote in the letter, I was looking for it earlier, but of course I've got ADHD and I'm horribly disorganized. But I have a letter and it says, does not exhibit anxiety over and above what you would expect in an adolescent with autism. And so why do they think it's okay?
My question
Oh, they're
is, why would
autistic,
you
it's all right to be anxious. Yeah.
why would you expect anxiety in an autistic adolescent?
Yeah. Because it's common. Yeah.
We don't expect typical children, so why are we expect it amazes me that it's almost like they don't read what they're writing. They don't listen to what they're saying, because if they really did, they would realize the absurdity of it. It is not normal to be anxious all the time. You know, like, we should not be expected to just live with it. You know, and to highlight that, Kate Groombridge says, you know, an autism diagnosis does not use anxiety or low mood as a diagnostic marker. They do not have to coexist, but often do. We need to try and address low mood and anxiety so that we don't have another generation of traumatized neurodivergent adults.
Absolutely.
You know, there is a reason why trauma is such a hot topic in the autistic community. And yes, there is something to be said for the people doing the traumatizing, but there's also something to be said for the services that are meant to be helping us that actually end up adding to that trauma.
I mean, this is about the kids, but just a personal gripe as well. When I did complain about that phone call where that woman twisted my words, the response was extremely sarcastic and scathing, even though I mentioned that I'd lost her older brother to suicide and that I myself have CPTSD. So it was really heartless, and you can't really explain that away with being under-resourced by government at all.
But this is something else that I think we need to talk about, because it's okay, yes, we have to put a big emphasis on the young person at the center of this, the young person who needs support, but it impacts the entire family unit. When one member of the family is suffering deeply and unable to get access to support, it impacts on every single member of the family, you know?
It's one of the reasons that I quit my permanent day job in HR. Is if Izzy has a really bad episode in the morning, I will drop everything and support her, and it can take me hours to bounce back from that because it triggers my PTSD.
And it's not, we're literally creating entire family units who are traumatized. Well, I say we, it's not us, it's services like CAMHS. And Marsha Ashman just shared some of their own experience as well, and said, my 17-year-old is on an enhanced treatment team's waiting list. Don't ask me what that means. She'll be 18 by the time she reaches the top, then they'll discharge her. There's a massive loophole when young people reach 16 because GPs won't prescribe medication. I finally got the GP to listen to my daughter and give her antidepressants. You know, we shouldn't have to fight this hard for access to the things that neurotypical wanted. You know, it's not fair. You know, we have a right to live a happy life. So why are we just expected to put up with it?
Yeah.
But
I have another friend who's extremely anxious and depressed autistic daughter. She ended up having to go private in the end because it was too desperate to fight this fight with the NHS services, and the GP won't enter a shared care arrangement. So this mum then, who's a single mum, is still paying through the nose every month for the medications that the kid has been prescribed, and there's no end in sight for that.
Yeah, and I want to move on a bit because obviously there is a campaign in progress to change things. If people follow my writing, they'll know I've published probably about 23,
Yeah.
24 blog pieces about this, but between them all have probably had sort of 50,000 views. There is a petition ongoing at the moment, which is going along the bottom of the screen. Um, if you're listening to this as just an audio only podcast, I will make sure that you can access the link. But there was they hit 200,000 signatures on the petition, and then they had a protest. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the protest because of other commitments. But you were there, Charlie. I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit about the protest.
Sure. Not very prepared, but yeah. So Emma Dalmain started this petition because her teenage son Damien who is autistic, was experiencing mental health challenges, and he was declined by CAMHS. And the route that they tried to send them to instead was really inappropriate and unhelpful. So she got this petition started, and over 200,000 signatures. So we had she and other directors at AIM had an appointment to deliver the petition to Downing Street. So that day, quite a few of us went, probably 30 or 40 people there, and a BBC News reporter, and we did a peaceful protest across the road from 10 Downing Street, and there were quite a lot of bereaved parents there telling their stories. So if you look on AIM's YouTube and on mine as well, you'll see footage from the protest and the speeches.
Yeah, and just a note for people, it's been delivered to Downing Street, but it is still collecting signatures. So if you visit that link that's going across the bottom, you'll sign it. And on top of that, on my website, on the CAMHS crisis page, I've also got an open letter to the UK Health Secretary on the go, which I think at the moment has about 2,000 signatures. There's lots of ways you can interact with this campaign. There is a mailing list for the campaign, which you can find on my website as well, or at the bottom of a lot of the blog posts, a sign up form. But there are a lot of us who really want change, and this petition that Emma Dalmain started, I think, has really shown that 200,000 people. That's potentially 200,000 families. So when you think of how many people are in a family, we're talking that's millions of people who could have been impacted by this potentially.
Yeah. And that's just the ones that have seen the petition and signed it. Think how many more.
This is not just something that we've thought up and gone, yeah, let's change this. This is a real issue that has impacted so many of us. It is a really, really poignant thing. It's something we really need to tackle. And we have to make change here. We have to do something different. And if they're not going to do it themselves, then we've got to try and make them do it, because these things have got to change. The next thing I want to see is I want to see this debated in Parliament. I want to see this talked about, because I know from my own writing work around this subject, I've seen evidence that's been submitted as early as 2009 to the House of Commons highlighting these exact issues that we've been talking about tonight, and still it has not been a major issue that's been dealt with. There's been no public inquiry. There's been no notice taken of it.
Brushed it under the carpet.
And
we're a growing army of people that are determined to affect positive change here, and we will make it happen.
So we need. Sorry.
don't have a lot of faith in the current government, given that they've not tabled the Mental Health Act when we expected them to, and the Suicide Prevention Act isn't a thing yet, and various other
Yeah, and
reasons.
people will know that, the Mental Health Act reforms was something I was actively looking towards because I did a podcast episode on it. And of course, now they've effectively ditched those reforms. And
It wasn't mentioned in the
we
King's
have to hope a
speech.
future government will pick it up because,
Yeah.
it may not have been perfect, but it was something. They were reforming things. But,
There are other ongoing campaigns that cross over with this as well. So, for instance, Leanne Maskell, the ADHD advocate, she's got one going for an inquiry into pre and post diagnostic support for ADHD and how that impacts mental health as well. There's the Jordan's Legacy, the suicide prevention charity. They've got one to try and push for a suicide prevention bill, which will include lots of different measures, including making sure that there's a mechanism for appropriate support for neurodivergent people. So the tide needs to change, but it does need people to stand up and make it happen.
yeah, so, we have to make a difference here because too many people are losing their lives to services that should be doing better, that should know better. And, I'm not going to be quiet about it till change happens, and I don't think you are either. And we know for sure that countless other autistic people, you know, will not be quiet. And I have to thank Emma Dalmain publicly right now for starting this campaign because,
Yeah.
we need this to happen. Um, so for anyone who's wondering what they can do to help, if you go to there's a website on screen at the moment. It's my website, emergentdivergence.com/CAMHS crisis. Um, that has links to the petition, the open letter to the health secretary. There's a model letter that you can send to your MPs. There is a sign up form so that you can sign up to the CAMHS crisis mailing list. There is like a slideshow that lets you look through and click on to read all the articles that have been published on my website about CAMHS since this campaign started. Please, anything you can do, help. Share things, sign things, write letters to people, make a noise about this. Don't let this get swept under the rug again, because autistic young people deserve a good quality of life. They deserve a life full stop, because as I think we've made clear in this episode, children are losing their lives because of this, and it's not enough to just let people brush that under the rug. So, Charlie, thank you so much for coming on this evening. You've shared
Thank
some
you.
really difficult stuff. I can imagine it's not easy to talk about this stuff publicly, because I know it was only a few years ago, wasn't it? Because
Yeah, April 2019.
I know I was
Iggy would have been 20 now, and Z is 15 now, which was the age that Iggy was when he
I
died.
was I think because your Facebook page already existed back then, and I was following you when it happened.
Yeah.
And I just for my part, I want you to know that I'm determined to make as much noise about this as possible, because our autistic kids deserve their lives. And thank you for being so vulnerable this evening and telling us your story.
I, I don't have a choice. I'm compelled to take action now. It's just not good
And
enough.
I know,
Autistic lives matter too.
yeah, they do. And I know for me as a father, I don't want to see my child or his sisters grow up in a world which is going to treat them badly. I want them to have a good life. So, you know, thank you to everyone who's joined in and listened this evening. It's been a difficult topic, and I've really appreciated you all joining in the comments, sharing your own stories, your own experiences. You all of you who speak out loud about these things. It's difficult, but you help make a little bit of change in the world. So thank you. And I will catch you all in the next episode. For anyone who's interested, tomorrow evening, so that will be Wednesday, the 15th of November at 7 p.m. UK time, I will be doing a live reading of my book, The New Normal, in Discord, followed by interactive discussion of the first chapter, which is what I'll be reading. This should be a fairly regular event as well. So please do come and join the Discord channel if you want to. And I will catch you all in the next episode, which actually is on Friday, this Friday. We've got a lot of episodes all sort of crammed together. So thank you very much, everyone, and I'll catch you in the next one.